For those who just joined, we are recording the session today. Please go off camera if you prefer not to be seen on the screen. Right. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. My name is Karima Ramji. I serve as Associate Director of International, Indigenous, and Accessibility at University of Victoria's Cooperative Education Program and Career Services. I'd like to start by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We're really excited to have you here today. The presenters have set aside 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session for your questions. So please submit your questions through the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. If you don't see the Q&A option, please click on the More button and you should see it there. Finally, I'd like to thank colleagues from Island Deaf Hard of Hearing Center who will serve as American Sign Language interpreters for us today. If you wish to view the interpreter better, we suggest you use the pin feature to allow you to always view the interpreter. We're also grateful to Amelia de Graaf Castro for her assistance with logistical aspects of all the sessions throughout the symposium. With that, I'd like to invite Andrea Giles, Executive Director of Co-op and Career Services here at the University of Victoria, to provide opening remarks. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first ever virtual Employer Symposium. This event was conceived as a way to say thank you to our many employers who have supported us over the years. Cooperative education at UVic was started more than 50 years ago. And I'm proud to say that this year, we are closing on a milestone of 115,000 co-op work term placements made. And our career services as well continues to grow and evolve to meet the changing needs of our students and the world of work. These accomplishments would not have been possible without all of you, our loyal employers, who have provided meaningful career-making opportunities for our students. We have incredible staff at UVic who are experts in their field, and they have generously given their time and knowledge to share their insights with you as you strive to build an inclusive and effective workforce in your organizations. I want to thank all of them and all of you for participating in this important event. I am especially pleased to welcome our keynote presenter today, Ms. Stephanie Cadieux, Canada's first Chief Accessibility Officer. Stephanie is an enthusiastic change leader and a strong advocate for diversity, accessibility, and disability and gender inclusion. She is a firm believer that as a society, we can no longer afford to accommodate inaccessibility, and we must challenge outdated mindsets and unconscious bias at every opportunity. Stephanie, you have become a tireless advocate for increased accessibility throughout your career, and we look forward to learning from you today as we strive to enhance accessibility here at UVic and among our employer community. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Hosting Stephanie is Niels Melis de Lamper, our Accessibility Co-op and Career Coordinator. I'd like to invite Niels to start off our program today with his keynote discussion entitled Questions on Accessibility, Q&A Conversation with Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer. Niels, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Niels Melis Lamper. I am, as Andrea mentioned, the Accessibility and Inclusion Co-op and Career Coordinator. It's a new role at University of Victoria since approximately 3 years, where we help students and employers break the barriers to employment. So as a pleasure, I like as been introduced, I would really like to welcome you, Stephanie, and thank you for making the time available today. It's such a pleasure to meet you again. We had the pleasure to meet briefly on the Open Door Group Untapped Accessibility Awards, where you spoke and like talked about your role and what you can do for Canada. So I'd like us to start off with sharing some of your insights. Your role came around 2022 under the Accessibility Act, right? And I'd be curious, like, how did you approach starting into a role that was very new at that point and a very defining role with a national and one could argue international impact?
Well, thank you, Niels, and thank you, Kathy. It's really nice of you to invite me to be here. So first of all, just to say I am joining from my home in Surrey, British Columbia, on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, primarily the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semyamu. And it won't be visible necessarily to you and to people who don't know me, but I use a wheelchair for mobility. I was injured when I was 18 years old. So that's why my passion for this goes so far back. And just to sort of situate as well. So I worked in the non-for-profit sector for 8 years as an advocate. And then I spent 14 years in the BC legislature as a politician. I've always been focused on inclusion in one way or another, primarily around employment for people with disabilities and women. And that led me to this, ultimately to this current role as Canada's first Chief Accessibility Officer. And Niels, you point out that the role was created in 2022 with the passage of the Accessible Canada Act. So I am the first one, which means that nobody really knew what it meant to be the Chief Accessibility Officer, including me. And the first 4 years, and I'm butting up against now the end of my 4-year term, has really been about establishing the role. What does it mean? What does the Chief Accessibility Officer do? And I mean, in a nutshell, I'm a champion for change, and I am an independent advisor to the minister responsible for the act. And my job is to prepare an annual report to the minister talking about the progress that we are making under the Accessible Canada Act and any impediments to that progress or any emerging trends or opportunities or things that are happening internationally that might influence what Canada does. So that was kind of the extent of what I knew I was getting into when I started in this role. But really, what it has become, or what I believe we have now situated the office as, is kind of chief influencer on accessibility. We don't direct what government does. We don't unfortunately have a magic wand that we can wave and make things so. And we're not the enforcer of the act or standards or what have you. That's the Accessibility Commissioner, and he's been in his role for just a few months now. He's actually also here in British Columbia, based here in British Columbia. That's Christopher Sutton. But my role is really to just keep accessibility at the forefront, keep it on the agenda, make sure people are talking about it, make sure people are remembering that it's their obligation to think about it. And that's because the Accessible Canada Act, in the law, in the regulation, mandates that all organizations that are federally regulated, from government entities themselves like the CRA or the Department of Fisheries, to organizations like CIBC or Air Canada, to develop, with the engagement of people with disabilities, accessibility plans that identify where the barriers are in their organizations and how they're going to remove them. So there's a ton of work going on, and it's my job to kind of keep a bit of a handle on what all of that is and where there are challenges emerging that are going to need other approaches in order to move things forward.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Yeah, that's so interesting, right? It's having roles like yours, and I see some recognition with my role, which was also new, and I also didn't know where to start, but it was a smaller scale. But we see impact here at Co-op too. Like there, we've seen our numbers go up from 17 students self-identifying as a student with disability to where since the role was created and we did some programming to now like 972, if I'm not mistaken. So that impact is just right, like just by being present and being involved. Fantastic. Yeah, and so you mentioned as well the Accessibility Act indeed is like it provides regulations, guidelines for federally regulated entities. Like, could you share with the audience here how yourself and your team puts effort into driving impact beyond that?
Yeah, I can. And you're right. It being present and being visible is a very, really big piece of the puzzle in and of itself. What we are really doing is driving a massive systemic societal change from the focus on people with disabilities as challenges or problems, and where it's up to them to remove the barriers they have in there that they encounter in the world themselves, find a way to exist in a world that wasn't built for them, and rather shift that now to make it the responsibility of society to ensure the barriers don't exist in the first place, and to recognize that people interact with the world in a whole variety of ways, whether that be because they have a disability or because of culture or language, sexual orientation, illness, injury, and at various stages of life, things are different for folks as well. So it really is about flipping the script and saying, no, 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 it's not up to me to figure out, how I'm going to get to work when there's no accessible transportation. To the world and the providers of transportation ensuring that I can use it. And that's a big shift for people. And while some of it sounds really simple and really obvious, accessibility is incredibly complex and difficult. And we have to recognize that, and we have to allow people to not understand or not know. We have to not make them the enemy, but instead help them to learn and understand. Make a safe space for people to get it wrong, and to learn and move forward. Because no two people with disabilities are the same, even if their quote diagnosis is what they need to interact with the world, or or how they want to interact with the world might be different. So there's an incredible number of possible ways or barriers that might then exist, and that we might need to look at. And so the first thing is changing that culture from a place where we see disability as less or as other, to an understanding that it's just people. And that is a lot harder to do than we think. We have for a very long time been a society in Canada that talks about inclusion, that espouses the virtues of these things. But whether or not we've ever put that truly into practice, you only have to speak to one person with a disability to know that we're not there yet. So my team really helps provide that space, because we aren't the regulator. We aren't the commissioner who's monitoring and enforcing compliance. We're not setting a standard that people have to live up to. We're helping people understand why they should do it. And it's that conversation that allows us to have difficult conversations sometimes with people and say, well, really, that's how you think you should solve this problem? Or, okay, well, did you consider? And it lets people open up freely and ask questions and say, oh, we didn't know that, or oh, we didn't get that right. And that's a big piece, I think, in the learning, right? It's about I am probably, I would have to say, one of the most well-versed people on accessibility and inclusion that we have out there. But I'm not an expert in everything. I get stuff wrong all the time. I'm learning all the time. And so that's going to be the same for systems and for people that are trying to do the right thing. And I think that's a big piece of this. It's about saying, okay, well, here's this standard or here's this law. But that's just the base, right? That we want that to be the place people start, and then we want them to go further. We want them to really embrace the idea of removing barriers and ensuring that people can contribute to their fullest potential.
That's really great sentiments. I also like what comes to my mind is what, some of the fellow advocates that I'm connected with, they'll often use the phrase, and you express some sort of same sentiment. It's progress over perfection, right? Sometimes the fear of supporting, like in our case, supporting co-op students who identify with a disability, like sometimes the fear of it on its own is like one of the challenges. So daring and having that courageous conversation of engaging in, okay, what does that mean for you specifically? Like, yes, I really like that. Thank you. Yeah, and so the way your team mostly provides recommendations to government, my understanding, is through your progress reports, right?
Yeah.
And so one of your first ones focuses on accessible employment, because that's like an obvious, a big part of creating that systemic change that you're after. So if we thought of accessibility as a cross-country train ride, right, where would we be right now? Would we be pulling out of the station?
Yep.
Would we be halfway through the Rockies, kind of,
Nope.
or are we moved from coast to coast, right?
Nope, we are definitely
Yeah.
just still pulling out of the station.
Yes.
We've made lots of progress, but it is slow. And as I mentioned in my report, employment is no more accessible to people today than 6 years ago when the act came into force. That doesn't mean that there haven't been improvements or that this isn't better or that isn't better, but overall the picture hasn't improved. So there are lots of employers that are out there doing good things. But I would argue most are not tackling the hard stuff. And the way I would explain that is it's relatively easy to hire a person with a disability into an entry-level position. But it is not as easy to move people along in their careers, to ensure that people are getting the opportunities to advance. And it's even harder to accommodate people with more significant disabilities. For example, people with speech or communication challenges. Those folks would not say today it's better or easier to find employment. And although the government of Canada set a goal of hiring 5,000 people into the public service, 5,000 people with disabilities, and they well exceeded that in their time frame, which is fantastic. What we don't yet know is whether or not we're keeping those people, and we don't know whether we're promoting those people. And I think those are those really persistent challenges that exist. And I think if you want to bring it back even further to, and really for today's audience, grounded around students and co-ops, the reality is that there are lots and lots of people with disabilities who go through university and get a really good education, and then they just go to university some more and get more education. Not that that's not a good thing. It is. But they do that not because they want to go back to school again. It's because they can't get employed. And, I can give you examples of people who have multiple degrees, speak multiple languages, and have been, given diplomas with honors from universities, who can't get an interview with a university in the discipline or the profession that they've been trained in. And that says something. We're doing it so long as it's other people's problem. And that's the real challenge, right? Students with disabilities are less likely, are highly less likely to be participating in co-op education programs. Why? For two reasons. One, co-op programs themselves have seen that as too difficult, too much work, too much effort for these short compressed time periods. And companies aren't already ready to accommodate and bring people in who have disabilities. So they say, oh, too hard, too difficult, too expensive. None of which is necessarily true. But it's the mindset that has kept people with disabilities out of these types of programs. And I would argue co-op programs at universities is one of the most important things for students, particularly with disabilities, because a lot of kids with disabilities don't get to start their career the same way other kids do. They don't get to get a job filling fry packages at McDonald's because they can't. So they don't have that same pathway on their resume. They don't have those pieces of employment progress that are standardized. And now in a world where HR is relying more and more on tools like AI, we've got a new barrier that's being created. And so programs like yours, I think, have an enormous opportunity to help tackle some of that really hard stuff at the front end for people with disabilities.
Thank you. Yes, and to anyone in the audience, if you are interested to tackle that along with me, please feel free to reach out. Because what you just mentioned, Stephanie, is like the students connected to you knocked the ball out of the park of being accurate with that. Right, there's many students connected to my role, like finding that co-op, finding that career experience. While they have multiple degrees, they're super intelligent, and yet getting past, that sometimes neuro-inclusive process of the interview or whatever the barriers might be. So, thank you for that comment. Now, like that same sentiment is reflected in your report, right? We're like you speak clear language in that report. It was a pleasure to read it. At the same time, there's also some points that you point out where you are proud of the progress that we made. So could you maybe highlight some of those for us?
Yeah. Well, I guess first off, what I would say is because I do a lot of international conversation as well through my work, attending things at different places and speaking with other employers. I was on a call this morning at 5 a.m. with folks in the EU talking about accessible procurement and how governments can use that as a tool. And that was hosted by Microsoft. And I'm just going to put a plug out there for Microsoft because Microsoft today actually also put out publicly a toolkit on accessible hiring, and it's available to folks to help them with making sure their organizations are ready for those applicants. And I thought it was a good tool. So I just wanted to say that. But yes, there is good stuff. And one of the things that I've learned through all of my efforts is that a lot of places in the world look to Canada as an example of what to do. And if we look at employment rates for people with disabilities around the globe, research I reviewed suggested that Canada sits near the top in terms of how we're doing. The challenge is that is still so bad, right? That the numbers are still so bad and we haven't moved them enough. So it's great that we've done better than other places, but it's not good enough yet. And in sort of my estimation, employment is such a big piece of who we are, right? It's so much of it brings so much to our lives. It's not just about economic inclusion, but it's about purpose, and it's about contribution, and it's about being a part of Canada, and it's a piece of exercising your full citizenship. And so if we've got a whole group of people, 27% of people who identify as having a disability, and if they're challenged in being able to do that piece, we're missing out on so much talent, so much innovation, so much creativity. We know organizations who hire people with disabilities into their workforce have better productivity levels, have better sort of wellness scores in their organizations. Their profitability goes up. So why would we not want to do this, right? And I think in most cases, organizations do. I think we have a lot of employers in Canada who really are doing a good job and who are really trying to get this right. Some of the banks are doing tremendous work in this regard. And that's, one example. There are some really small companies who are doing this work really, really well. Because for them, sometimes it's easier. Their structures are not as difficult. It doesn't take time to get approvals. It's just Joe hiring Sarah and making it work, right? But it is about that culture and that desire, because when you want to find a solution, they're pretty easy to find. When I was at MLA, I hired a person as my assistant in my constituency office. She couldn't communicate verbally. And that's a very interactive position with the public. And she was worried about it at first. And I said, well, look, most of us these days are communicating by email and text message. So you do that. You look after the finances, and the person who was looking after the finances is now going to look after the front, the phone calls, because she likes that. And you are good at this. So it's not that difficult in a small office to make the adjustments necessary. And we can translate that in larger environments as well. We just have to have the willingness to do it. And within the government of Canada, this is a large employer in the country, and they have some pretty established policies and parameters and what have you. But even they are making some really good steps. As I said, they hit their hiring target. They've moved forward with a workplace accessibility passport, which is essentially a written agreement between an employee and their manager that talks about the barriers that they face and about how they're going to be accommodated, right? And so that travels with them. It simplifies process, and that's really good. Accessibility Standards Canada has now published a national employment standard, which is something employers can look to say, okay, how do I do this? How do I be an accessible employer? And it helps walk them through the things they need to be thinking about. And again, it's setting that baseline of understanding and allowing for those conversations to start. I think the biggest thing is, though, that progress is slow because we haven't changed the culture. We still see accessibility as optional and not essential. And until we see intentional inclusion of people with disabilities at a more senior level in organizations, I don't think we're going to see that bigger culture change. So it's a bit of chicken and egg, but yes, I do think we're moving in the right direction.
Fantastic. Yeah, I catch some things that you mentioned as I like the passport idea, right? Because it goes along with people. And I think sometimes, on the scale of co-op here at the university, when employers or when students ask for accommodations, there's this certain concern of having it right from the start. And that's not necessarily what an accommodation is, right? It's like starting that conversation, as you mentioned, and it's like that, creating that avenue for a two-way street of like, hey, how can I feel best supported as an employee to be most successful and bring your company value? And how can I, as an employer, kind of work towards that, right? And then in 2 weeks, we'll reevaluate that portion and see how things are moving along. And if it's not, we'll adjust. So, there's no reason to hit the bullseye from the start. So I really love that comment. Fantastic. Another piece that stood out for me in the report is the call to action for better data, right? So if employers on the call here today would like to start improving tracking their data, measuring impact on accessibility and inclusion, what would be some key metrics that you recommend? And
Um,
maybe at the end of that answer, could employers go somewhere to get some knowledge on that?
um, uh, Basically, I would say just get started on it. Establish a baseline. Figure out where you are in terms of policies for accessible employment. What do your policies say about disability or accessibility? Have you considered accessibility in your crisis or evacuation plans, in your physical space, in your travel policy? Um, how is your physical space for accessibility? Have you done an audit? Where are you? How many people with disabilities do you think you have? Um, right? If we know 27% of people have a disability, then probably you've got, upwards of 20% people in your building already, that have a disability. And are you meeting their needs? I think the sort of key metrics would be around employment rates, um, proportion of full-time or part-time roles filled by people with disabilities, um, retention and promotion rates across disabled and non-disabled employees, um, the timeliness of access to accommodations at work. Did it take 6 months to get the special keyboard for somebody, or was it available, quickly? Um, and training participation rates for training around accessibility. And that's something that I put in my very first report to the minister, that one of the things I think is really important if we're going to move the dial and change culture is making sure that everyone, board down, has access to and takes some training on accessibility and inclusion at work. What does that mean? I think that's really important. So, is there one place you can go to get all that? No, there isn't, definitely. But there are initiatives happening. The government of Canada has started a boot camp on accessibility metrics. And the Canadian Business Disability Inclusion Network could be a really good resource, as well as here in BC, EABC, the President's Group, Accessible Employers, that that operates here. They've got lots of good stuff going on, and are a really good place for employers to go for information and support on accessible hiring.
Fantastic. Great. So we've been talking a lot about the surroundings and what we're trying to establish. But hypothetically speaking, let's imagine that we have a Zoom room full of hiring managers, right?
Mhm.
Waiting to learn how they make their business more accessible, right? Like we have today. So I happen to be. Um, if you could give them a practical action or a few that they could
Mhm.
implement tomorrow, next week, to make a measurable difference in
Mhm.
accessibility and inclusion, what would it
What would it
be?
be? I would say start with curiosity. Um, and with that, um, put it up front in your process. So don't say, simply in your job posting, we're an inclusive employer, or we welcome candidates to tell us that they have a disability. No. Um, Rather, ask if something is missing in your process. Don't be stuck in your process. So with that, I would say the place we ideally want to get to is a place where people with disabilities aren't treated differently at work, right? And so really what we want to get to is a place where we're asking all of our employees, what do you need to be successful here? Right? Don't force people to seek out accommodations as a special thing. In fact, there are a lot of organizations, not a lot, some, some, I'll say a lot, it sounds better, of organizations who are putting in place things like a vending machine model for accommodations. So here's this list of tools that if you need one of these things, just go ahead and order it, right? Things like adaptive mouse, different headphones or like sound or noise canceling headphones, things like that. Rather than making it something that you have to go through this great big process for. Just say, okay, well, hey, if you need one of those, yeah, we can get you that. But make it upfront so that it's available to everyone and it isn't sort of this special thing. I think that is something that organizations could actually do a lot more easily than they think.
Fantastic. I love that point, and I really enjoy you mentioning that because that's something I always tell employers. Like, because so many employees will ask for certain support, right? I'm a young father, I have two young children. I have to go pick up my kids from school sometimes earlier, and so that flexible time, like nobody really questioned that,
Mhm.
right? But when it comes to like an official accommodation progress, all of a sudden employers go like, well, we kind of need proof from your doctor for that. And, you know, I
Yeah.
didn't have to bring my kids to work to show that. So that idea is something that we should as a society. Yes, I fully agree with you on that. Like, and yes, sometimes there is more of a bigger process needed, right? We can support we can support all accommodation requests as here's the cutoff, get a noise
Mhm.
canceling headphones. Like some are more complex, but if it's right, a logical thing to do, yes, I fully applaud you for that comment. So yeah, we're nearing kind of our time. Like, and as a closing question, if I could be the advocate of the devil, say in 5 years you come back to UVic and you check in with our employer co-op network, what would make you say, "Whoa"? Like, this employer network has hit the hammer on the nail.
Mhm.
How can an organization truly demonstrate, and rather than just telling applicants that they've checked off and embraced accessibility instead of, just checking that box?
Um, well, I'd say that, I mean, it's a hard question to answer because there isn't really one thing. Um, but accessibility isn't something that can be applied at one stage, right? It can't be applied and forgotten. It has to be embedded throughout an organization, throughout policy, throughout culture, from hiring processes, training tools, office space, decision making, um, and decision making on an outward basis, right? Service delivery, programs, products. So I think if an organization is talking about accessibility in all of those realms, publicly making it clear where they stand, um, that's probably uh, where where I'd be able to say, okay, now okay, you're really there. Um, it's that opportunity, I guess. The clear sign is when people with disabilities are working and hiring rates are up, employees with disabilities numbers are up, employees are set up for success in their roles, and they're not leaving. I mean, that would be a good sign. And I guess, Niels, I'm just going to take an opportunity because I have the mic at the moment to go back 1 second to our previous comment and question and your response to my sort of just make things available and make it easy to get accommodation. Ask everybody, and I do feel that that's really important. But I will also say it's also really important that it's a two-way conversation and a two-way street. And by that, it's one of those things that we could label with the difficult conversation header. But people with disabilities also have to be really clear with their employer about what things are true accommodations and which things are preferences, right? You might prefer to work at home. It might, but for some people, it might truly be an accommodation. And in order to understand that that's a true accommodation, more information might be required, right? Somebody who doesn't want to work in an office without a window, that's a preference. For that to be an accommodation requirement is there would have to be some discussions, right? And the reason I say that is because workplaces, businesses all have reason, like limited space. They have things, there are things you have to do. I can't be a fighter as a wheelchair user. I can't be a firefighter. That's not practical. That's not going to happen. It doesn't mean I couldn't work for the fire service, but it wouldn't be as a firefighter. You can't accommodate that, right? And we have to be realistic about that as well. Some people are more suited to one type of work than another. And we all have to learn those lessons as we go and figure ourselves out as well. And it's a big part of this, right? It's not all on the employer. And I think that that's just a point I want to make, that employers have a lot of work to do, but people with disabilities have to meet them on the path. And to be successful, have to really understand themselves as well. And frankly, over time, that understanding may change. Their situation might change, what they need might change. My disability has changed over time, and my abilities as a result. And what I didn't need last year, I need this year in order to do my job. So that's why it has to be sort of an ongoing conversation, but you have to build trust to have that conversation. And that trust in both directions has to happen.
Absolutely. Yes, I really appreciate that like closing comment. And yeah, if any student is watching this recording, right, today is really focused on employers, but students might watch the recording. If you have questions on how to connect with your employer and have that conversation in a strength-based way, like please do reach out to me, reach out to your home co-op coordinator, to your employer themselves. Because most often employers, and especially in BC, I like really find the pleasure of working with lots of employers in BC. Like we're all committed to support you through this conversation, but it's a hard conversation to make, and it's your conversation to make. So thank you, Stephanie, for that closing remark. So yeah, I'd like to, like, as we mentioned prior, like to open it up for questions from the audience. And I see we have some in the Q&A, or one question at least already. Oh, so the question is, can you explain what EABC is? But I think you meant Yay BC, right? Or is that a specific organization, is what's been asked in the Q&A.
I'm sorry because I don't even remember what I said. So
I think you were rooting. I think you were rooting for BC.
Rooting for, yay, BC. Oh yeah. No, that was just rooting for BC. Because I'm proud of the work that's gone on in BC with the President's Group, Accessible Employers. It was something that evolved out of my initial ministerial committee that I appointed on accessibility and employment way back in 2011. And so I'm just always proud of the effort that's gone in BC and the really good work being done by the employer community here. It is not something that we have across the country in the same way, but the new Canadian Business Disability Inclusion Network is looking to change that as well. And so that will be a network, or it is a network. It's been founded and is growing across the country. Their executive director is out in Ontario, but their chair of their board is here in Victoria as well. So again, yay BC, pom-poms for the work that's being led here in my home province.
Great. Yeah, in the meantime, I have a very interesting question in the chat as well. So the question reads, thank you, Ms. Cadieux, Stephanie. I'm thinking about students and recent grads with disabilities who are navigating two barriers, a tough youth job market and ongoing stigma around disability. What strategies or supports do you think are most effective in helping students and recent graduates overcome these challenges as they enter the current changing workforce?
I think the best thing you can do for yourself is connect to a mentor. One or two. People that are already in the workforce. It doesn't have to be the president of a company or whatever, but somebody who is already there, who you can talk to, learn from, get, bounce ideas off of, who can help you break in. And it may not be into their company, it may be into a different one, but to connect to somebody who's already working, that's really important. And it's really important, I think, mentorship all the way along, whether it be formal or informal. Mentorship is important in folks' careers, and not everybody has the same path or network. It's easier perhaps for some than others, and disability just creates another layer that can be a barrier. So I would say find a mentor, and there are lots of ways to do that through university, through employers themselves. One of the things that I also think I have seen be successful is many of the local chambers of commerce or boards of trade have student memberships available, or programs whereby folks can take advantage of some of their events or networking opportunities. Those are important, especially if you don't have a network yourself yet. It's another way. Often the people who attend those are the kind of people who are going to be hiring managers or whatever. But it's also, I think you'll find people like to be asked. Like to be asked, could I possibly take half an hour of your time and interview you, and sort of understand from your perspective what it's like in your industry, or how I might approach getting into your industry, or whatever. People want to be helpful to other people because nobody does it alone, right? Everybody's had help along the way, and most people want to pay it forward.
Yeah, fantastic. So maybe if we could flip that lens, what could employers do to support recent graduates?
I would say kind of similarly. One of the things you can do is in those environments that you participate in out in your communities, consider asking your local board of trade or chamber of commerce to host an opportunity for students to join, to make a point to reach out to the local university or others, and include some people who are just graduating or looking for work, because it can be intimidating for folks, and I would argue even for folks like me, way late in your career, it can be intimidating when it's time to look at a change. So knowing that people are inviting you in is big. And then the other piece for employers I would just always highlight is take a little extra time in your process reading the resumes. Look look a little further. Maybe interview a few more candidates that you are, less confident, but from their application that might be ready, especially if they're students, because not everybody has the keywords in their letter or in their resume. They still need a chance to get in the door and start somewhere.
That's a fantastic final remark to kind of close our conversation on. So I'll let that sink in with the audience and pass it on to Karima Ramji to give her closing remarks. Thank you so much for this conversation today, Stephanie.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie and Niels, for a most inspiring conversation. I think each of us is leaving inspired to become as big a champion as you are, Stephanie, in our workplaces. So thank you so very much. To all of you in the audience, thank you for joining us. I hope this has inspired you to stay with us for the rest of the week. We have some fabulous sessions coming up. Our next session begins at 12 noon, where our employment development officers will host Dave Murray from the Information and Communications Technology Council, or ICTC, to speak to you about how you can hire students from our co-op programs, what funding is available to you to do so as well. And at 1 p.m., our community engaged learning team will talk about how nonprofit organizations can benefit from student talent through our community engaged learning programs. You can view the entire program at the symposium at a QR code. No, sorry, we'll put a link in the chat for for the entire symposium, but you've all signed on for it, so you already received all the links. Thank you very much, all of you again. Really appreciate you being here with us today, and we hope to see many of you at the next session. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Thank you, Liz and Jess.
Really, I think we can stop the recording here.